Good evening. This is our second lecture in the course 313 Literary Texts. As you remember, last time we started with poetry. We did one poem, and today we are going to do our second poem, which is a poem by Shakespeare. The poem is called Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare, and the poem is one of a group of a series of poems, sonnets that Shakespeare has wrote, 154 sonnets, and they were addressed to two different people. The first group was addressed to a young man, and the second group was addressed to an unidentified lady. And this sonnet 18 is one of the most well-known sonnets in English poetry, actually one of the most well-known poems in English poetry, perhaps for its simplicity, for its ease, and for the playfulness of the theme, as we are going to see. I will read it once with you first, and then we are going to explain it line by line, and then speak about the poem in general, and finally we are going to look at some of the Arabic translations of this poem and go quickly over the difficulty of translating poetry and how possible at all it is. Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, in spite of some of the difficult English, Old English words like thee and thou, which mean you, or hath, which stands for has, the language of the sonnet is not all that difficult, and we are going to read it together line by line to make sure first we understand the meaning of the poem, and then also that we are capable of analyzing the main imagery. And just a reminder, last time we spoke about two groups of imagery. We either have visual imagery or sensory imagery, which includes visual or auditory or tactile imagery, and these are descriptions either of something that you can see, something that you can hear, description of a touch, how soft it is, how hard, etc. Or we have imagery that include comparisons, and these imagery come under the general term of figurative language or comparisons, whichever way. For the sake of this course, we will only go over three kinds of these figurative language. As we spoke last time, we will go over metaphor, simile, and personification. And I would like you to be aware of the use of these figurative figures of speech in this sonnet as well as in the one that we have done before. Let's start with the first two lines. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Usually when we start reading a poem, it is a good question, it's a good thing to ask the question, who is speaking to us? And then to think, what is the message? And actually the speaker here makes himself very prominent, very clear at the beginning. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? The I that is speaking to us at the beginning of the poem is definitely the I of the poet, because he is speaking to us about his work as a poet, the work of comparison, the work of playing with words or working with words, whichever way you see it. So the poet is speaking to us in his capacity as a poet, as a writer, and speaking about his work of comparing words and comparing things and writing, speaking about writing. But there is a thee. Thee is you. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And probably the thee, it does not refer to the reader. He is actually speaking to somebody else, probably the woman he loves, or what is called in English, especially in the old days, the beloved. So his first sentence, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, means will I compare you to a day in summer, probably because of the niceness and the loveliness of summer days. And here we have to note the cultural difference between us living here in Egypt or in the Middle East and between a place like England, where the only possible nice days are present in summer. Winter can never be nice. It's always extremely cold, and summer is not always nice, but perhaps nice. To us, this is a little bit different. As you can see here, the poem starts with a question in the form of a metaphor, comparing the beloved to a morning in summer. And yes, of course, day is not only does not only mean yom, but it can only mean sabah. And probably here he is speaking about a summer's day, meaning a morning in the summer, where later you're going to see he's speaking about the sun and about the brightness and so on. So the poem starts with a question in the form of a metaphor, comparing the beloved to a morning in summer. The comparison being the loveliness of both. This metaphor is extended through the whole sonnet, as we will see. And let me remind you of the definition of a metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison between two things without using the connectives as or like. So here he does not say, you look like a summer day or as a summer day. He is immediately comparing her to a summer's day. In the second line, the answer comes in the negative. That is, no, I shall not compare you to a summer's day. And the reason, thou art more lovely and more temperate. Thou, we will remember, means you. Art is an old way of saying are. So you are more lovely and more temperate. Temperate means gentle and pleasant and معتدل. Okay, so the second line, as we said, answers the question in the negative. No, I will not compare you to a summer's day. You are much more beautiful. You are much more gentle than a summer's day. And of course, here he is complimenting his beloved beyond all conventional compliments. Like complimenting a beloved conventionally would be by comparing her to a summer's day, to a flower, just as in our culture we would compare a beautiful woman to the moon. Here you have some Old English words that are used in the poem, and as I told you, in spite of these Old English words, the rest of the poem is very simple and very accessible. Thou and thee mean you, art is are, the old way of writing verb to be, are, and hath again is the old way of writing has. And you're going to find the th substituting or written instead of the s in so many other verbs, and you can understand it in the same way. The next lines continue this comparison between the beloved and summer, to the benefit of the beloved, of course. The poet keeps saying why he does not think that summer adequately expresses the beauty of his beloved. So he keeps telling us all the disadvantages of, if you like, or the yes, the disadvantages of summer. Here, lines 3 and 4. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. The third line, I would like you to note, is a visual image describing how the wind, even in summer, can be too strong. Rough معناها عنيف أو قاسي. And these rough winds would disturb the flowers at its earliest stage. Buds are براعم, and they are described with the adjective darling, means loved. Of course, the buds are one of the most moving things in nature, and as a visual image, it is a very moving visual image. So supposedly the flowers that have already grown can endure the rough winds, but it is the buds that would suffer. So here is a visual image of the roughness of summer. As he said before, you are temperate, you're not like summer, and here he's giving us evidence of the roughness of summer. Summer can sometimes have these winds that shake the young flowers, even in the midst of summer, that is in the month of May. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. A lease is a contract, عقد. And here we have another use of an image, but not a visual image this time. It's a comparison, and he is comparing summer to a lodger, مستأجر. So summer's lease hath all too short a date. Summer here is compared to a lodger who rents a place, and this place is probably the world. So summer comes to the world as a lodger who rents only a certain time and then leaves us to other seasons. And this period, however, is very short. So here you have this, and summer's lease has all too short a date. That is a very short period. Summer stays with us for a very short period. And of course, again, this compares in a disadvantage to the beauty of the beloved, which presumably is going to stay longer. He does not want to compare his beloved to summer because summer is short, and he would like to think that the life and the beauty of his beloved is much longer. We move on to the next lines, and we are continuing with the disadvantages of summer. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. Here we have more use of figurative language in the description of summer, but we are precisely describing now the sun and the sky. In this line 5, there is a personification of heaven or the sky. It looks like a human being. Heaven is a human being who has an eye, and this eye is the sun. Line 5 is a personification of heaven. The sun is compared to a human eye in the face of heaven. And this eye shines. Of course, eyes are supposed to shine with happiness, with cleverness, but here this eye is shining too hot. That is disadvantagingly. Line 6 continues this image and presents another with the sun, in which the sun is compared to a gold face that darkens. So now it's not heaven that is the face, but the sun itself is a face, a human face, a gold human face, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. Complexion is a word that can either mean the color of skin, whether you have white complexion, dark complexion, etc., or it can mean the face, just the face in general, and here it means the face. So, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. That is, the golden face of the sun is dimmed. Dimmed means darkened. And of course, if you try to imagine how could the sun darken its face, it darkens its face through the sky and through the clouds. I'm sorry, and this is yes, a reference to the clouds that hide the shining sun. So we have sometimes during summer, even during summer, cloudy days. Again, if you go back to the English summer, we can easily speak about also rainy days and not just cloudy days. So it's not all sunshine all summer round. So often is his gold complexion dimmed means that this face, this golden face of the sun, and it is referred to by his, personifying it, is clouded by the clouds that hides its light. And also dimmed means darkens, and when a face darkens, it means that it is either angry or sad or something of the sort. So the comparison here has also these meanings, and they are in opposition to the temperate nature of the beloved, who probably does not get too angry or too sad even. So sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. Here we move from the extended image of the comparison of the summer and the beloved and start speaking about all beautiful people or all beautiful women. The first line, line 7, speaks about the beauty of women. Fair is another word for beautiful. It means right, it means good, but it also means having a white complexion with yellow hair. That's fair, as opposed to dark. But it also means simply beautiful. Beauty, and a beautiful woman is called fair. So in line 7, he speaks about the beauty of women. Fair means a beautiful quality and also means a beautiful woman. He uses both meanings in this line. The first, fair, refers to every beautiful quality. And so he says every fair, meaning every beautiful part, your beautiful eyes, your beautiful hair, etc. From fair, that is from beauty, sometimes decline, will lose. To decline is to lose gradually. So your beautiful eyes, your beautiful hair are going to be not so beautiful with time. This is what he's saying. And every fair from fair sometimes declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. Now, how does every woman lose her beauty? She can lose it by chance, that is by any sort of accident, or if no accidents happen, then it is by the course of nature. Time passes and a woman loses her beauty. Nature's changing course untrimmed, that is, to untrim something is to take away. So either accidents or the passing of time will take away the beauty of every woman. And line 8 tells us that the loss of beauty can either happen by chance, an accident for example, or by nature's changing course, that is simply by the natural passing of time. In the third quatrain, Shakespeare goes back to his first metaphor of the summer. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. He goes to his first metaphor and also speaks again to his beloved directly. And he uses contradictory terms. He says summer, he's been saying to us that summer cannot be compared to his beloved because his beloved is much more beautiful, and summer has all these disadvantages that he would not, it would not be fair to, fair meaning right here, to compare it to the beloved. But here he tells her that thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. He makes a statement, a very strange statement, that will need an explanation because it, for the first reading, it does not make sense. He uses a contradiction of terms, calling summer eternal. Eternal meaning does not end. So he tells her, you have a summer that will never end. Eternal is the opposite of temporal, and temporary is meaning mu'aqqat. So it is abadi rather than mu'aqqat. So he calls her summer eternal, that is not ending, claiming that it will never disappear gradually as all summers do. Fade is to disappear gradually. We use it in describing a sound that fades, which decreases and then is heard no more, or also a color that fades, a color that is washed away one time after another until it does not look bright anymore. So thy eternal summer shall not fade, that is, you, my lovely woman, will have a summer that will stay forever and will never end. And then he adds the same meaning, but not in a metaphor, but in direct words, that is, your beauty will stay forever. Nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. You will never lose possession امتلاك. You will always have that beauty that is in you now. Unlike anybody else, you will always have that beauty that is in you now. Nor shall death brag the wondrous in his shade. These three lines give us a sort of impossible images, and each one is stronger than the one before it. You're going to have an eternal summer, and then you will always be beautiful, and not only you'll always be beautiful, you will not die. And this is the third line. Nor shall death brag the wondrous in his shade. To brag means to show off, to be happy and say, I have done a great thing. That's to brag. يتفاخر. And to wander is to walk. So here we have an image, a personification of death, saying that death will not go showing off that he has got you walking in his shadow. It is a portrayal of death as someone who is definitely very evil and who would like to collect beautiful women and have them in his walking beside him. But he says death will never be able to do this. Now, as I said, the three lines move from an unusual situation to an impossible situation, because the first line speaks about thy eternal summer. Perhaps he wants to say that like some countries where the climate is always temperate, you are like that. You're not like the British climate or the English climate. Perhaps an eternal summer is a possibility in some countries. But then, not to lose possession of your beauty, this is a harder thing to achieve. How come a woman, in spite of time, will not lose possession or will always be beautiful? And yet, this is possible. What is totally impossible is that she is not going to die. This death is something only human, and no one escapes it. Even if she's going to be beautiful all the time for some reason or another, she definitely cannot escape death. And therefore, these three sentences will have to be explained by Shakespeare. How come this woman will achieve this kind of immortality, الخلود. So Shakespeare decides finally to compare his beloved to a very special and unreal summer. He leaves us with this paradox and puzzle to decide how to solve before he gives us the answer in the next final line of the quatrain. We keep throughout the sonnet, we don't really understand what his how he's going to solve that puzzle. At the beginning he says, I am not going to compare you to summer. Your summer is different. You are a person who's not going to lose her beauty. You're not a person who's going to die. How come he's going to explain this? He does in the last line of this quatrain. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. And line 13 reveals the secret to these impossible situations. The beloved and her beauty are not eternal, but the lines of poetry are. So how he's going to keep the beauty of the beloved without being touched by death or by any kind of change, he's going to do this by fixing them in lines of poetry, and by this they are going to stay. The beloved will not only live in these lines of poetry, but she will grow. And yes, this is a very interesting example of another metaphor. It's not only living, she's not going to be fixed, but she's going to grow, as if she's going to be more beautiful whenever these lines are read. And this is what the couplet tells us. The beloved and her beauty are probably like an ordinary summer with all its shortcomings, but the poetry of the writer will make her beauty special. The idea is emphasized and repeated in the final couplet, which is a kind of conclusion. Perhaps you remember that we said the construction of a Shakespearean poem, unlike a Petrarchan sonnet, which is divided into two stanzas, an octave and a sestet, the Shakespearean sonnet is divided into 3 quatrains and a couplet. And in the couplet we have a conclusion or a kind of twist. And we do have a kind of twist and a surprise in this couplet, though it is anticipated or we're given some idea about it in the last line of the 3rd quatrain. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. As long as there is human life on earth, men can breathe and eyes can see, the beloved's beauty will live on. This is because humans will read and therefore will know about her beauty and see this beauty in the lines of poetry, though not in the woman herself. And of course the reference to this is to the poem itself, the poem that he has written. We do have, of course, a visual image here of people living in different generations, men breathing, eyes seeing, and we have the assumption that this poetry is great and will live and people will read it, and this is why the beloved will be immortal. I would like to remind you of the elements of a Shakespearean sonnet before we go again and read this sonnet, now that we have understood it line by line, in order to discuss the general meaning of the sonnet and the general effect of it and the general tone of this sonnet. A Shakespearean sonnet, or sometimes it is called an English sonnet, consists of 3 quatrains and a couplet. A quatrain يعني رباعية. So it is divided into 3 quatrains and a couplet. Like a Petrarchan sonnet, it consists of 14 lines, but they are differently divided. A Shakespearean sonnet follows a strict rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. This is again this is again different from the Petrarchan sonnet. And the couplet is an important part of the sonnet. Remember when we spoke about the Petrarchan sonnet, we said that its structure is dependent on the octave and the sestet and the difference between both. Sometimes the octave gives us an argument, and then the sestet gives us the counter argument or the opposite argument, if you like, or the octave gives some questions and then the answers are in the sestet. As we've seen in the sonnet that we've studied, we have the idea of forgetting, and it is in the octave we have the octave is given to discussing the idea through time, and the sestet discusses the same idea, the idea of forgetting, through a change of place. The octave discusses it through the passing of time, and the sestet discusses it through the passing of, or the changing rather, of place. Here we have quatrains, and the three quatrains develop an idea, and usually the couplet either makes that twist or change or surprise, or simply makes some sort of conclusion. The couplet is an important part of the sonnet where there is some sort of conclusion, refutation, or a surprise. And Shakespeare indeed surprises us, because we start this poem thinking that he is speaking about his beloved, and he is utterly moved by her beauty and by how much he loves her and how much he appreciates her beauty, and we end up seeing that he is actually speaking about himself and his poetry, and not about the woman he loves. Before we discuss this, let's quickly make sure that we are aware of the rhyme scheme. I want to remind you that just like in Arabic, rhyme scheme does not go by writing, it goes by sound. It is the sound and not the way the word is written that counts when we are speaking about rhyme scheme. So two words that end with the same sound, off and enough, although they are written differently, would be considered two rhyming words. So here we can see that the sonnet follows strictly the rhyme scheme of an English or Shakespearean sonnet. You have they, this is our first sound, A, we'll give it the name A, and then ate, temperate, and this will give the sound B, and then may, A again, and then date, B. So it's the first quatrain, A, B, A, B, and usually each quatrain is an independent sentence, but not always. In the second quatrain you have shines, and rhyming with declines, and dimmed, declining with trimmed, untrimmed. So it's CD, CD. And then fade and shade, E, E. Owest and growest, that's F, F. And then the final couplet rhymes together. And of course the rhyming does not just reflect this strict scheme, but also reflects the importance. The couplet has to stand on its own, because it is a different part, a part that emphasizes a different idea. So the poem thus starts with the question attempting to describe the beloved, but ends with a surprise or a twist, as we see that Shakespeare's aim is really to speak about the power and immortality of his own poetry. The beauty of the beloved and its effect upon him are only his chance to speak about himself and his art. The poem cleverly moves from pretending to be about the beauty of the beloved to speaking about an impossible, immortal beauty, and finally reaching the surprising conclusion that is stressed by the couplet. It is poetry that is immortal and not human beauty. It is, yes, a very clever way, and it brings us to a discussion of the tone of this poem. A tone meaning the way the poet is speaking, and I would not call this the way he's speaking serious or extremely romantic, but he is speaking to a certain extent in a playful tone, and the playfulness starts from the question that starts at the beginning. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That is, it gives us some, as if we have options of whether he will compare her to this or not, and he is giving her the choice. So there is some sort of playful tone that is an understatement actually at the beginning, but that is clear at the end when he finally tells the beloved that almost she is not the important, or she's not the subject of his admiration, but rather his own poetry is. Another reading of this poem could be to say that he loves her so much that he's going to give her the most precious thing that he has, which is immortality, almost like a charmer who has a certain supernatural power that he can give, and he decides to give it to his beloved. The poem, of course, like all poems, can be interpreted and reinterpreted in many ways, and I hope you can read it and reread it now that you've understood it, and feel it in whichever way you think is possible. And this is how one really enjoys literature and poetry. Now, before we end, I would like to quickly go over some of the problems and the difficulties of translating a work like this. Translating poetry is definitely not an easy task, and I suppose it requires a poet more than anything else. But let's see how different people have attempted translating this poem. I'm not going to go over all the translation or even all the lines, but I will discuss some of the lines and different translations and see how each reflects something of the poem and leaves out something else. Let's start with the first two lines. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? thou art more lovely and more temperate. With translating poetry, the first thing that comes to mind, are we going to translate um, in and keep the music, or are we not going to keep the music? Because as we've seen in poetry, you have you have here in this sonnet in particular, you have a strict rhyme scheme, and how can a translator translate this? The first two lines, I have chosen 4 different translations to compare, and we're going to see what problems we have in translating them. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate? The first choice here I have to make is how I'm going to translate the music. Music is central to poetry, and as we said, a sonnet has a very strict rhyme scheme. Are we going to translate the music, or are we going to translate the meaning? I have here 4 different translations, and we're going to see what they have done. ترجمة الدكتور محمد عناني: ألا تشبهين صفاء المصيف بل أنت أحلى وأصفى سماء. ترجمة الدكتور عناني فيها قافية مش موجودة في السطرين دول، بس بتبان بعد كده لو قرينا القصيدة على بعضها. هل أقارنك بيوم من أيام الصيف إنك أحب من ذلك وأكثر رقة. من ذا يقارن حسنك المغري بصيف قد تجلى وفنون سحرك قد بدت في ناظري أسمى وأغلى. هنا عندنا قافية واضحة. هل من نظير في جمالك بين أيام الربيع بل أنت أبهى منه صحوا واعتدالا لا يضيع. الترجمة الأخرانية بتحط مشكلة تانية قصاد المترجم، وهي إنه زي ما قلنا الصيف ما هواش أفضل جو بالنسبة لسكان البلاد العربية، وبالتالي الحقيقة الحاجة المناسبة أو الكالتشرال ايكويفالنت زي ما بنسميه، أو المعادل الثقافي ليوم صحو وجميل وكذا في الصيف هو أيام الربيع. فالمترجمة ياسمين محمد قررت إنها تترجم بشكل حر تماما، وإنها تترجم المعنى الثقافي مش المعنى اللغوي أو المعنى الإحالي زي ما بنقول إنه السمر يبقى صيف. قررت إن السمر يبقى الربيع، بمعنى إنه هو يقصد اليوم اللي فيه جو جميل، والربيع هو اللي فيه جو جميل، يبقى هو عايز يتكلم عن الربيع. دي واحدة من الحاجات اللي ممكن نتناقش فيها في الترجمة. يهمني هنا ان انا اوريكم انه باستثناء بدر الرفاعي اللي هو مقدم ترجمة الحقيقة حرفية جدا، وما فيها شاعرية قليلة جدا. لما تقرأ القصيدة كلها الواحد بيلاقي انه هذه الفكرة بتاعت shall I compare thee to a summer's day اللي هي فيها شاعر عمال يشير إلى عمله كشاعر، وأنا بقارن وأنا بعمل وأنا بكتب. ودي قد كده قضية مهمة، لأنه بعد كده هو هيركز على إنه شعره هو الأهم، مش الست ولا جمالها اللي هو بيتكلم عنه. فالإشارة الأولانية لعمله كشاعر وهو بيقارن وكذا هي إشارة مهمة جدا، ومع ذلك بتضيع تماما في كل الترجمات. ألا تشبهين صفاء المصيف، وكأنه I compare thee أنا اللي موجودة وموجودة بوضوح في أول سطر لشكسبير لا ملهاش وجود في الترجمات الأخرى باستثناء ترجمة بدر الرفاعي هل أقارنك بيوم من أيام الصيف. لكن الحقيقة ترجمة بدر الرفاعي بالنسبة للترجمات التانية في عناصر أخرى بنلاقيها أضعف شوية بسبب إصراره على إنه هو يبقى قريب جدا من النص، وإن كان ده بيدينا قرب ما للمعاني اللي كان بيقصدها شكسبير. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May and summer's lease hath all too short a date. هنا برضو عندنا صور مختلفة. في صورة اللي هي البصرية بتاعة الرياح العاتية، ودي الكل بيعملها بشكل دقيق بقدر الإمكان. إنما عندنا صورة العقد هي اللي بيكون فيها اختلافات. سامرز ليس دكتور عناني بيقرر إنه هو يشيلها لأنه عقد وكده ممكن تكون خارج سياق الشعر، فبيترجم معناها لا يلبث الصيف حتى يزول. الدكتور صفاء خلوصي والصيف يمضي مسرعا إذا عقد المحدود ولا بيحط المعنى وبيحط مسألة العقد. إنما في ياسمين محمد يغيب عنا ذا الربيع بعيد أجال قريبة. هنا طبعا هي حاطة موضوع الربيع وما بتجيبش سيرة الصورة بتاعة العقد، وده مشروع جدا في الترجمة. بقية المشكلات الترجمة اللانهائية انتوا ممكن تكملوها مع في كورس الترجمة الأدبية، بس دي مجرد إشارة لبعض الصعوبات اللي في ترجمة قصيدة زي دي على سهولتها بالإنجليزية، عشان ننقلها العربي مسألة بتتعقد بشدة. أشكركم.